Hashtag Thor's Thunderous Adventure, a Norse tale with a twist. In the realm of Asgard, where the sky shimmered with the colors of the rainbow bridge Bifrost, and the golden halls of Valhalla gleamed in the eternal sunlight, there lived a young boy named Thor. But this wasn't the mighty Thor you might have heard of in legends, not yet, anyway. This Thor was a small, freckle-faced lad with wild red hair that stuck out in all directions, as if he'd been struck by lightning, which, given his future, wasn't entirely impossible. Thor lived in a cozy cottage on the outskirts of Asgard, where the grand palaces of the gods gave way to rolling meadows filled with flowers of every color imaginable. The cottage itself was a charming mix of rustic comfort and divine magic. Its walls were made of sturdy oak, but they glowed faintly with protective runes. The thatched roof was home to a family of sparrows who sang the most beautiful melodies in all the 9 worlds. Inside the cottage, it was always warm and inviting. The main room had a large hearth where a fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a mix of sweet and spicy aromas. And in one corner stood a massive bookshelf, filled to bursting with scrolls and tomes from every corner of the cosmos. Thor's parents were none other than Odin, the All-Father, and Frigga, the All-Mother. Odin was a tall, imposing figure with a long gray beard and a patch over one eye. He always seemed to be deep in thought, as if the weight of all the worlds rested on his broad shoulders, which, in a way, it did. Frigga, on the other hand, had a gentler presence. Her golden hair seemed to glow with its own light, and her eyes sparkled with wisdom and kindness. But Odin and Frigga were often busy with the important task of ruling Asgard and maintaining the balance of the 9 worlds. So, more often than not, young Thor found himself in the care of his uncle, the trickster god Loki. Loki was unlike any other god in Asgard. Tall and lean, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to change color depending on his mood, he moved with a fluid grace that made him seem almost cat-like. His black hair was always slicked back, and he had a habit of raising one eyebrow in a way that made you feel like he knew something you didn't, which he usually did. "Thor, my boy," Loki would say each morning, a mischievous twinkle in his eye, "what marvelous mischief shall we get into today?" And mischief they found, as sure as Yggdrasil had roots. There was the time they replaced all the apples in Idun's orchard with onions painted gold. Or the day they convinced Heimdall that his all-seeing eyes needed glasses. And who could forget when they filled the warriors' 3's helmets with honey, just before a grand parade? But despite all the tricks and japes, Thor had a heart of gold. He was always quick to help others, whether it was assisting the Valkyries in grooming their winged horses or helping Bragi, the god of poetry, find rhymes for particularly tricky words. One sunny morning, as golden rays filtered through the cottage windows and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the kitchen, Thor woke up with a brilliant idea. He raced down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, and burst into the kitchen where Loki was lazily stirring a pot of porridge. "Uncle Loki," Thor announced, milk dribbling down his chin as he grabbed a quick drink, "I've decided. I want to be the strongest god in all the 9 worlds." Loki raised that infamous eyebrow of his. "Is that so? And how do you plan to achieve that, young Thunderbolt?" Thor puffed out his chest, trying to look as mighty as possible in his rumpled nightshirt. "I'll lift the heaviest things, eat the mightiest feasts, and," he paused, thinking hard, his brow furrowed in concentration, "and I'll get the most powerful weapon ever made." Loki chuckled, a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a hiss. Well, that's quite the ambition. But you know, strength isn't just about muscles and weapons. It's about wit, too." He tapped his forehead knowingly. But Thor wasn't listening. He was already racing out the door, determined to start his quest to become the mightiest god in all of creation. First stop, the Great Hall of Valhalla. If there was anywhere in Asgard to find heavy things to lift, it would be here. The hall was enormous, its ceiling so high it seemed to disappear into the clouds. The walls were adorned with shields and weapons of fallen warriors, and long tables stretched as far as the eye could see. Thor marched up to his father's throne, an enormous chair made of gold and inlaid with precious gems. Surely, if he could lift this, he'd be well on his way to becoming the strongest god. With a grunt of effort, Thor wrapped his arms around one of the throne's massive legs and pulled with all his might. His face turned as red as his hair, and he strained so hard he thought his eyes might pop out. But the throne didn't budge an inch. All Thor succeeded in doing was stubbing his toe and causing a minor earthquake that made all the shields rattle on the walls. Nursing his sore toe and his bruised ego, Thor decided to move on to the next part of his plan, eating the mightiest feast. He made his way to the kitchens, where the cooks were preparing for that evening's banquet. Mountains of food were piled high on every surface, roasted boars the size of horses, barrels overflowing with apples and grapes, and wheels of cheese as big as cartwheels. Thor's eyes lit up at the sight. This was his chance. He grabbed an entire roasted boar and began to eat. And eat. And eat. He moved on to a barrel of apples, then to the cheese. By the time Frigga found him, he was lying on the floor, moaning, his belly so round he looked like he'd swallowed one of the 9 worlds. "Oh, Thor," Frigga sighed, helping him to his feet. "What am I going to do with you?" Feeling more than a little discouraged, and a lot overstuffed, Thor trudged out of the palace. He had failed to lift the heaviest thing, and eating the mightiest feast had only given him a terrible stomachache. But he still had one more chance to prove his strength. He would get the most powerful weapon ever made. With renewed determination, Thor made his way to the workshop of the dwarves. The path led him deep into the mountains of Asgard, where the rock itself seemed to hum with magical energy. The air grew warm and smoky as he approached the great forges where the dwarves crafted their legendary creations. The workshop was a marvel to behold. Flames danced in enormous furnaces, and the rhythmic clanging of hammers filled the air. Sparks flew as the skilled dwarves worked their magic, turning raw metals into objects of wonder and power. The chief dwarf, Brokkr, looked up from his anvil as Thor entered. He peered at the young god over a pair of spectacles that seemed too small for his large, bulbous nose. Well, he rumbled, his voice as deep as the mountains themselves. "What brings the son of Odin to our humble forge?" Thor drew himself up to his full height, which, admittedly, wasn't very impressive next to the stocky dwarf. "I seek a weapon," he declared. "The mightiest weapon ever forged." Brokkr's bushy eyebrows shot up, disappearing into his hairline. "A weapon, you say? For a little godling like you?" Thor nodded eagerly, his earlier failures forgotten in the excitement of the moment. "Yes. The most powerful weapon in all the 9 worlds." Brokkr stroked his long beard thoughtfully, leaving smudges of soot in the tangled hair. "Well," he said slowly, "we might have something. But it comes with a catch." "Anything?" Thor exclaimed, practically bouncing with anticipation. Brokkr disappeared into the back of his workshop, weaving between piles of half-finished projects and bins overflowing with precious metals and gemstones. When he returned, he was holding a small wooden mallet. Thor's face fell faster than Odin's spear could fly. But it's tiny," he protested, unable to keep the disappointment from his voice. Brokkr winked, a gesture that looked oddly mischievous on his craggy face. "Ah, but remember the catch? This hammer, young Thor, will only grow as big and powerful as your heart is kind and your intentions pure." Thor took the hammer skeptically. It felt no heavier than a toy in his hand, and about as impressive. But there was something about it, a faint tingling sensation that ran up his arm when he gripped the handle. Thanking Brokkr, because his mother had raised him to be polite, after all, Thor left the workshop, his new weapon tucked under his arm. He couldn't help feeling a bit deflated. This wasn't exactly the mighty artifact he had imagined. On his way home, Thor passed by Baldur's garden. Baldur, the god of light and purity, was kneeling in a flower bed, a look of frustration on his usually serene face. The beautiful god was trying to plant a new type of flower, a gift from the light elves of Alfheim, but the ground was too hard and rocky. Without thinking, Thor offered his new hammer to break up the soil. As he focused on helping Baldur, putting all thoughts of becoming the mightiest god aside, something strange happened. The hammer grew just a little heavier, a little larger in his hand. Surprised but intrigued, Thor continued on his way home. As he walked through Asgard, he came across Freya, the goddess of love and beauty. She was struggling with a heavy cart filled with golden apples for Idun's orchard. One of the wheels had broken, leaving her stranded. Once again, Thor stopped to help, using his hammer to fix the broken wheel. And once more, as he worked selflessly to aid another, the hammer grew. By the time Thor reached the outskirts of Asgard where his cottage stood, the little wooden mallet had transformed. It was now a magnificent hammer, its head gleaming with intricate runes, its handle wrapped in soft leather that fit Thor's hand perfectly. Energy crackled around it, and Thor could feel the power thrumming through his entire body. Loki was waiting at the door of the cottage, a knowing grin spreading across his face. "Well, well," he exclaimed. "Look at you, Thor. It seems you found your strength after all." Thor looked at the hammer in awe, then back at his uncle. "I have, haven't I? But not in the way I expected." Loki nodded sagely, which was an unusual look for the trickster god. "The mightiest strength often comes in surprising forms, my boy. Now, what shall we call this marvelous hammer of yours?" Thor thought for a moment, turning the hammer over in his hands. Then he smiled, a smile as bright as the Bifrost itself. "Mjölnir," he said confidently. "It means that which smashes. But I think I'll use it more for building than smashing from now on." And so, young Thor learned that true strength comes not from power alone, but from kindness, helpfulness, and a pure heart. From that day forward, he and Mjölnir were inseparable, ready to help wherever they were needed in all the 9 worlds. As for Loki? Well, he was already planning their next adventure. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another day. The sun began to set over Asgard, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. In the distance, the great tree Yggdrasil swayed gently, its leaves whispering secrets of the cosmos. And in a cozy cottage on the outskirts of the realm eternal, a young god drifted off to sleep, his new hammer clutched tightly to his chest, dreams of future adventures dancing in his head. For this was just the beginning of Thor's story. The 9 worlds were vast and full of wonders, and with Mjölnir by his side, there was no telling what marvels and mischief awaited the young god of thunder. But those, as they say, are tales for another time.